Primary runoff elections in Georgia and Alabama are showing former President Trump's endorsement might not be enough to get people elected. Political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns is following these races for us from Capitol Hill and joins us now. Katie Britt has defeated Congressman Mo Brooks in Alabama's Republican Senate runoff. Former President Trump actually switched who he endorsed during that election. So what impact, if any, did it have, Caitlin?
Hey, Errol. Well, this was a really fascinating primary to watch because you're right. Trump had originally endorsed Mo Brooks, and then when he saw that he was failing in the polls, falling behind in a crowded primary, he rescinded that endorsement. And what was really interesting about him rescinding that endorsement was that it kind of empowered Mo Brooks to say, look, the president tried to get me to overturn the election, and started kind of going after Trump. And we got some more revealing data points about Trump's efforts to overturn the election through that rescinding of the endorsement and Mo Brooks's comments. Then late in the game, just recently, Trump endorsed Katie Britt, who was the chief of staff for the retiring Senator Shelby. For his seat, of course, is who they are vying for. So yes, Trump endorsed Britt in the last minute, but that's not what really put her over the edge here. She had been leading in the polls, and this was kind of a situation where Trump hitched his wagon to someone that was destined to win this race. And of course, Alabama is a ruby red state, and Katie Britt will likely be the next U.S. Senator from Alabama. But she really focused her race on kind of issues, economics and crime and other issues that Republicans are hoping to run on nationally, and tried to kind of tailor them to her race, not so much about Trump.
Yeah, Mo Brooks made the fatal error of saying we should probably move on from the 2020 election. It's been a couple of years. But let us turn to Georgia, where Trump endorsed House candidates lost their runoffs by wide margins. So is it that Trump's influence just isn't there, or were these candidates substandard?
Yeah, Anne-Marie, Georgia's been fascinating to watch because it's really kind of been ground zero for former President Trump's kind of vendetta campaign against the state. Remember, he endorsed a challenger to Brian Kemp last month only because Kemp voted to or certified the election results in his state, and he's been angry at him since. He endorsed a challenger to Brad Raffensperger because Raffensperger, of course, has been kind of the center of Trump's ire because he also said that the elections were fair. So he also endorsed in a couple of House races that went into a runoff. One of them, he endorsed Vernon Jones, who lost to a candidate there who was endorsed by Kemp. So this is a state where Trump has kind of gone all in trying to endorse a lot of different candidates, and he hasn't been successful. Talking to Republican strategists and campaigns and candidates themselves, we have been learning that, you know, the power of Trump's endorsement can only go so far, but he is endorsing candidates who believe his false elections claims, or at least say they do, that he watches polling. He's had a lot of visits to Mar-a-Lago. So when we're kind of looking at his influence here, he's endorsed a lot of different candidates in races up and down the ballot. He's cast a very wide net, but in Georgia, his political ambitions have not been able to pay off in that state.
And what's interesting is you're mentioning how an endorsement from former President Trump is having mixed results. I'm wondering what the fire and anger from former President Trump will do. You mentioned incumbent Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, for example. He was a part of the January 6th testimony. He said the 2020 results were legitimate. He will now face State Representative Bee Nguyen. She won the Democratic runoff last night. So what can we expect in that matchup, considering those dynamics?
That's right. And the fact that Raffensperger was successful in his primary last month, avoiding a runoff in Georgia against a Trump-backed candidate, does show that, you know, he was able to be successful against Trump's endorsement. But also, you know, when I interviewed him last month, he said that he spent a lot of time going county to county, voter to voter, and making his case. And now, of course, you know, secretaries of state usually aren't these kind of high-profile candidates. A lot of times we don't really pay attention to these kinds of races because they do the work of election administration in most states. But because of the 2020 election and the ways in which, as we saw through testimony yesterday, the ways in which Trump was trying to pressure officials to overturn elections in the states has really made these candidacies and these positions all the more, having national importance. So Georgia is a state that we're going to be watching here. Remember, after the 2020 election, the Georgia legislature passed more restrictions on voting in the state that Governor Kemp signed into law. These are new laws that Raffensperger supported, so that could be an element here. But he is well poised to, contend in this race, and we'll see whether this challenge from the Democrat can be effective. But Raffensperger has really become kind of a national figure given his role in pushing back against Trump's false election claims.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much, Caitlin.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you.